The Cleveland Browns released workout photos this week, and I know that sounds like the most mundane sentence I could open with, but stay with me, because what those photos showed, and more importantly, what they didn't show, tells you everything you actually need to know about where this quarterback competition genuinely stands right now. This isn't about a press conference or a leaked report or an anonymous source. This is about a voluntary offseason session where players made their own decisions about whether to walk through that door, and the result of those decisions was more revealing than anything that's been said publicly about this situation in months. Shedeur Sanders was there. He was in the building, in the photos, participating in a session that nobody required him to attend. Deshaun Watson was not there. Gabriel was not there. Just Shedeur, alongside a meaningful cross-section of his teammates. Offensive linemen, wide receivers, defensive players, specialists, all making the same voluntary choice on the same voluntary morning. And I want to engage with this honestly rather than overhype it or dismiss it, because I think both of those responses miss what's actually significant about what happened. Let me start with what voluntary actually means in the context of a quarterback competition, because I think the word gets misused in both directions. On one hand, people who want to minimize the significance of Watson's absence will say, correctly, that optional sessions are optional, that missing one doesn't indicate anything about a player's commitment or fitness or readiness. On the other hand, treating voluntary attendance as completely meaningless in a competitive context is its own form of motivated reasoning. The truth sits somewhere more specific than either of those positions. Voluntary sessions are not where starting jobs get won on the field. The reps themselves, while valuable, aren't the primary reason a competitive football player makes the choice to show up when the building isn't requiring him to. The primary reason, and coaches who have spent decades evaluating players understand this intuitively, is that voluntary presence is one of the clearest available signals of what I'd call active investment. It's the choice to compete before the competition has formally opened. It's the decision to build relationships, accumulate preparation, and generate daily credibility with the people who are going to decide your professional future, all in a setting where nobody is watching you on behalf of anybody who can penalize your absence. That choice, made consistently, in small moments across a long offseason, is what shapes organizational conviction about a player's hunger. And organizational conviction, more than any individual workout or combine number or press conference answer, is what determines depth chart decisions. Shedeur Sanders has been generating that conviction consistently. Not just this week, every available piece of information from inside that facility has been pointing to the same picture. A player treating this competition with total seriousness, investing in every available opportunity to prepare, building familiarity with the system and with his teammates in ways that don't require any formal structure to facilitate. The voluntary workout is not a standalone data point. It's the most recent and most visible confirmation of a pattern that has been developing and compounding since the moment he arrived in Cleveland. Now let me engage with Watson's situation directly, because I think fair treatment of this story requires honest analysis rather than reflexive dismissal of where he stands. Watson has been saying publicly and showing on social media that his body is in good shape. The footage that's been circulating of him working out suggests his Achilles recovery has reached a point where full functionality is at least approaching. If we take those signals at face value, if he genuinely is physically capable of competing right now, then the decision to skip a voluntary session that his direct competition attended becomes something I genuinely struggle to explain on football grounds. And I've tried. Here's what I keep running into. When you are fighting for a starting position that every credible report in the league has been describing as already tilting away from you, the framework of voluntary versus mandatory stops being the framework that actually governs your decision-making. The mandatory floor becomes irrelevant because you're not measuring yourself against the mandatory floor. You're measuring yourself against what it actually takes to close the gap between where the organizational evaluation currently sits and where you need it to be. Watson at his best, the version that was dominant in Houston, that went to Pro Bowls, that commanded the market that convinced Cleveland to surrender a historically unprecedented collection of draft capital and guaranteed money. That version of Deshaun Watson understood exactly how this calculus works. That player didn't need anyone to explain to him that competitive investment is demonstrated through daily choices rather than formal requirements. His absence from this session communicates something about where his head is that I don't think serves his cause, regardless of how his legs are feeling. The most charitable reading I can construct for Watson is that there's something logistical or personal we don't have visibility into that explains it. Maybe there was a scheduling conflict with his rehabilitation program. Maybe there's a medical recommendation involved that hasn't been made public. I'm genuinely open to those possibilities, and I think it's worth acknowledging them before drawing hard conclusions. But the charitable reading still has to sit alongside the observable fact that the session happened, that Shedeur was present, that Watson was not, and that the Cleveland Browns released content from that session featuring the player who showed up and not the player who didn't. That last detail is not a small thing. The Browns posted content featuring Gabriel from similar sessions last year. The choice to document this workout in the way they did, and to make those images public, is itself a form of organizational communication about who they're building around. The Dylan Gabriel dimension of this story has a different texture, and I think treating it the same as Watson's absence produces a misleading picture of what's actually happening. The reporting around Gabriel has been pointing with increasing consistency toward a player who has absorbed the organizational signals about the direction this competition is heading and has begun the process of mentally and emotionally detaching from the situation, a trade request or a request to explore other options, which is what the reporting suggests, changes the meaning of missing a voluntary session fundamentally. A player who has concluded, based on the totality of what he's seen and heard from the organization, that his professional future is going to unfold somewhere else isn't going to walk into that facility with the investment and presence that the competition requires. That's not a character reflection. That's a human being responding to the specific reality his situation has produced. Whether Cleveland finds a trade partner on terms that make sense for both sides is genuinely unclear and will take time to resolve. But Gabriel's absence feels less like competitive indifference and more like a situation that has already found its resolution in the minds of the people involved, even if the formal announcement hasn't happened yet. What I want to spend more time on, because I think it actually tells the richest part of the story, is the composition of the people who were in that building with Shedeur. This wasn't a collection of practice squad candidates and undrafted rookies trying to scratch their way onto a 53-man roster. Zion Johnson was there. KT Leviston was there. Mason Graham, one of the most significant defensive additions this roster has made, was there. Jerry Jeudy, a veteran wide receiver with genuine NFL production history and zero obligation to be impressing anyone in an optional workout, chose to walk through that door. Darnell Washington, Isaiah Bond, Quincy Williams, the kicker and the punter. A cross-section that represents real roster depth, real organizational credibility, real professional investment in the preparation ahead. And in the middle of all of them was Shedeur Sanders, the only quarterback in the room. Think about what actually gets built in a session like that. The offensive linemen who will be responsible for keeping him upright in September are developing familiarity with him in a low-stakes environment before the full pressure of training camp arrives. The receivers who will be running routes for him are establishing timing and communication and the kind of informal chemistry that only accumulates through shared time. The defensive players who will see him every day in practice are forming their first real impressions of who this person is as a competitor and a leader before any of the formal evaluation structures of training camp shape those impressions. All of that relationship building is happening specifically around Shedeur because he was the quarterback who showed up for it. And all of it matters in ways that no individual statistical metric can capture, but that every experienced football person understands instinctively when they talk about what separates quarterbacks who win over locker rooms from quarterbacks who merely perform in them. There's a concept that I think gets reduced to empty sports speak so often that its actual substance gets lost. But I want to try to recover that substance here because I think it's genuinely relevant. Winning the locker room. What does that actually mean in operational terms? It doesn't mean being popular. It doesn't mean giving good speeches or being someone that reporters find quotable. It means building trust through the accumulation of small, consistent voluntary demonstrations that you take the shared enterprise seriously. It means the offensive lineman who gets to the facility at 7 in the morning sees that the quarterback was already there. It means the receiver who's working on his route stems in the offseason discovers that the guy throwing to him chose to come in. It means the defensive player who's going to see you in practice every day this summer forms his first impression of your competitive character, not from a press conference, but from the fact that you were in the building on a day when you didn't have to be. Those impressions accumulate. They shape the way veterans talk about you in private conversations. They create a foundation of earned respect that carries enormous weight when things get hard during the season, and the locker room has to decide whether to rally around its quarterback or let the doubts that difficult stretches always produce take hold. Shedeur has been building that foundation, quietly, consistently, through exactly these kinds of choices. And every time he makes the choice that the competition doesn't make, every optional session where he's present and they're not, every early morning where he's in the film room when the required schedule doesn't start until later, the gap between his organizational standing and theirs widens in ways that the formal competition of training camp will largely ratify rather than reverse. Todd Monken's operational philosophy, as best as I understand it from everything that's been reported about how he runs a program, is built on exactly this kind of daily evaluation. He doesn't extend organizational trust based on contract size or past reputation or the professional pedigree that someone accumulated before they walked into his building. He extends it based on what he observes every day in the facility, who treats preparation as a non-negotiable commitment rather than a requirement to be minimized, who demonstrates through repeated voluntary choices that they understand what this level of competition demands, who gives the coaching staff consistent evidence that they are all in on this specific competition in this specific moment. Watson carries a $44.9 million cap figure into this season and a career history that in most organizational contexts would generate substantial deference. In Monken's program, operating on Monken's standard, that history is context rather than currency. The currency is what you demonstrate today. And today, Shedeur was in the building. I want to be careful about how I frame the conclusion of all this because I think intellectual honesty requires acknowledging the limits of what a voluntary workout actually proves. It proves that Shedeur made a specific choice on a specific morning that his competition didn't make. It proves that the Cleveland Browns chose to document and publicize that choice. It proves that the pattern of available evidence about how this competition is unfolding continues to point consistently in one direction. What it doesn't prove, what nothing short of a formal starting quarterback announcement proves, is that the outcome of this competition is finalized. Training camp will happen. Practices will be evaluated. Whatever formal competitive process the organization runs will produce its official result. I'm not in the business of declaring things certain before they're certain. But here's what I do believe, and I want to say it clearly. NFL quarterback competitions are not decided by a single dramatic moment or a standout training camp practice or a brilliant preseason performance. They're decided by the slow, steady, daily accumulation of everything that happened before the formal competition even began. By the time August arrives and the competition is officially underway, the coaching staff will already know who they trust. The locker room will already know who they respect. The organizational infrastructure will already reflect months of investment pointed in one direction. The formal competition will largely confirm what the informal competition already produced. And the informal competition, played out in voluntary workouts and film sessions and early morning building visits and optional sessions where one quarterback shows up and the others don't, has been producing a consistent result for months. Shedeur Sanders walked into a Cleveland Browns facility this week when nobody required him to be there. He worked alongside his teammates, built relationships, generated credibility, and sent a signal about his investment in this competition that required no words and left no room for misinterpretation. The photos are there, the pattern is there, and every day that it continues, the foundation under his claim to this starting job gets harder for anything else to displace.